At 1:43 a.m., my phone lit with two notifications that should never arrive together. The first was a DocuSign completion email for a quitclaim deed transferring 50% interest in our Ballard condo to a name I did not recognize. The second, time-stamped exactly 31 seconds later, was a King County recorder receipt confirming the deed had been recorded while I slept, my digital signature looping across the PDF like a forgery done by someone who has watched my hand. I stared at the blue ribbon icon that promises authenticity and felt the sudden weight of seeing your life notarized into an arrangement you never consented to. Our place sits on NW 65th, second floor, a narrow unit with west light that turns everything gold at 8 in the summer. The building is one of those newer four-story jobs wedged into a lot that used to be a single cottage. It has a community room nobody uses unless the HOA demands it, and a bike storage cage that smells faintly of chain grease and damp concrete. I run a small e-commerce shop out of the second bedroom, shipping ceramic pendant lights to people in cities I have never visited. When orders slow, I take weekend paint jobs, trim, and cabinets mostly because nothing calms me like a straight cut and a steady wrist. My husband, Tom, is a firefighter paramedic with Seattle Fire, based out of Station 9 in Fremont, though he swaps shifts often enough that our calendar looks like a chessboard drawn by someone nervous. If we had been rich, we would have treated last year as a story to be told at a distance. We were not. We were an MRI copy for my tilted world, the stubborn HVAC that insisted on a new heat pump during the hottest July Seattle had bothered to offer in a decade, and an HOA special assessment for garage ventilation because someone's Tesla didn't like the old fans. My father in Spokane started dialysis in March. He is practical and apologetic at the same time and insists that his kidneys are just bored. The last of our wedding money dripped away on a plumber's emergency fee to stop water from staining the ceiling over the table I sanded until I could see my face in the grain. These are the kinds of details that set the stage where you find yourself pretending to understand a deed at 1:43 a.m. The first red flag wore laundry and cedar. Tom began coming home with a scent that wasn't hospital antiseptic or smoke. It was the expensive cedar and black tea cologne sold in the kind of shop in South Lake Union where men buy knives and shaving brushes. He said a lieutenant gifted sample vials after a training. The second flag wore miles. Our Subaru's odometer added quiet addends on nights. He swore he was stuck on the third medic run of an overtime shift, and the toll record showed 520 bridge crossings to Medina that made no sense for a man stationed in Fremont. The third flag blinked. The Ring doorbell would drop to black for precisely 13 minutes on Thursdays at 10:22 p.m. And the app would bless me later with a note about network instability even though my router remained steady and my work Zooms never stuttered once. I did what women who run tiny businesses learn to do before they allow panic to drive. I made a folder, tabbed it with a date, and moved everything into it. The DocuSign email, the recorder receipt, the PDF that bore a notary stamp from Rainier Title and Escrow on Lake City Way, the stamps ink a little too perfect to have touched paper that night. The audit trail inside the DocuSign file listed an IP address that matched our Comcast router and an event at 9:58 p.m. viewed by signer 9:59 p.m. signed 10:0 p.m. completed. Tom had texted a busy night at 9:55 p.m. with the photo of a gloved hand and a vague background like every firefighter's social media. At 7:45 a.m., I walked down to the coffee shop on 24th, Ballard Coffee Works, with my laptop and the deed open like a wound. I forwarded the files to my business email and to a brand new Gmail I made at the counter because it felt like a lifeboat. I set the Ring app to chirp every time anyone fiddled with the breaker that powers it. Months ago, I had stuck a cheap wise cam near the panel in our hallway after reading a forum about burglars who kill doorbells the way raccoons learn to open latches. My order number was written on a paper cup with a smiley face. People around me talked about the farmer's market and boat repairs. I became the kind of person who stares at timestamps like they contain air. Our HOA meets in the community room on the first Tuesday of each month because bureaucracy likes rhythm. I brought my folder to that evening's meeting and sat with neighbors who know us as the couple with the plant wall and the EMS sticker on the Subaru. The president talked about garage carbon monoxide sensors, then opened the floor. I said I needed to address an urgent matter regarding a recorded transfer of ownership and potential bylaw violations. I laid out the deed, the DocuSign print, the notary stamp, and a copy of our bylaws highlighting the clause against transferring common interest without board notice and approval. I kept my voice the same one I use when explaining to a client that their favorite antique shade is cracked and will not hold its shape if they insist on a certain brass fitting. The neighbors shifted. One of them made a small sound that may have been sympathy or hunger. Tom arrived late, hair damp, the red SFD sweatshirt half-zipped. He scanned the papers as if seeing them for the first time. He said he had no idea. His face did not blush like mine would have. The treasurer, a woman built entirely of policies, said the board would send a notice to both owners of record demanding explanation and potential rescission, and she said it in a way that made me love bylaws for the first time in my life. The next day I went to Rainier, title with a stack of questions and the face I use on contractors who do not call back. The clerk with a name tag that said CJ could not release a notary journal without a subpoena. He could, however, confirm that the notary on the stamp had been on duty and that an appointment block existed near 10 p.m. for a walk-in with the last name Harris. My last name is not Harris. I took a photo of the door from the sidewalk like a tourist in the middle of the worst field trip ever and emailed a lawyer a neighbor had mentioned once with my subject line all numbers and the words forged quitclaim. Money decided to make everything meaner out loud. I opened the BQ app and saw a $3,800 Zelle transfer to SLU Furnishings from our joint checking. I called BQ and placed a hold on all outgoing transfers. The representative contained his disbelief with admirable professionalism and gave me a case number BECU-540,113 and told me to file a police report to Link. I opened a checking account in my own name with $500 and moved my Etsy deposits there because if a ship is taking on water, you move the art before the couch. I froze our joint credit cards and texted Tom a screenshot of the freeze confirmation with the same tone I use when I leave a note on the fridge that says out of milk. I wrote a certified letter to our HOA, to the recorder, and to Rainier title indicating a disputed signature on record and requesting a hold on any future recordings regarding our parcel without in-person verification. Paper began to feel like sandbags. Tom offered an explanation during the one quiet half hour when both of us existed in the same room and our calendars stopped scraping. He said a friend had been in trouble, that her ex had used her credit, and he had co-signed a temporary arrangement because he could help. He said he had been attempting to move assets to keep us afloat because he knew my shop's orders had slowed, and he said it like a man who believes numbers behave if you assert them firmly. He said the name on the deed was a relative, the SLU furniture was a favor, the notary was busy, the DocuSign a misclick, the ring blackout's a firmware bug. Everything he said would have slid like cheap oil if not for what the Wise camera caught 3 nights later at precisely 10:22 p.m. The panel door opening, a hand familiar to me flicking the breaker labeled doorbell XFRMR of the hallway going dark in a way that lenses cannot capture and yet do, the sound of the back door hinge, and then 13 minutes later the breaker snapping back on. Reveal 1 walked into my inbox at 6:12 a.m. the morning after the board meeting, an email from Seattle City Light thanking me for setting up a new service at an apartment on Fairview Ave in South Lake Union, Unit 10B, scheduled to begin that Friday. The account listed my name as co-responsible. The service history showed 0 previous tenants. I sat at the kitchen table with that email open and Google Maps up, my coffee going cool. The building's website showed a lobby like an airport and a view of Lake Union's ducks pretending to be exotic. I printed the welcome email and slid it into the folder. Reveal 2 sat on our doormat like a cat that purrs because it knows you cannot kick it. An AmEx envelope congratulating Yen Harris on being added as an authorized user to our Platinum account. Card mailed to the Fairview address. The last name matched the deed transferee. The first initial stole my breath for a second because I thought of a name I had only seen on the corner of Tom's phone when he set it face down, Nora. I called him X, removed the user with the brisk competence I reserve for returns to suppliers who shipped the wrong socket kits, and wrote down the case number they gave me like a new kind of prayer. Reveal 3 arrived uninvited from our neighbor, a solid man who runs the dry cleaner on 70th, the kind of neighbor who notices what time the mail comes and when a cat has a limp. He waved me inside the shop on my way to the library and said he had been meaning to show me something. He had installed an Arlo to catch package thieves, and the camera had captured Tom and a woman unlocking the back gate at 10:26 p.m. during one of the ring blackouts. The woman held a small child, a toddler with a knit hat with bare ears. Tom reached for the child as if it were the most ordinary motion he had ever made. The timestamp in the corner blinked like a metronome. The dryness of my mouth then felt like I had swallowed chalk. Reveal 4 wrote itself in the yellowed shorthand of a nurse's scrawl. I found in the side pocket of Tom's turnout bag, while looking for a spare Ziploc for our kid's wet bathing suit, a postage-size discharge instruction sheet from Swedish First Hills Labor and Delivery. It listed a mother's name, Nora Harris, father, Thomas Green, visitor, N/A infant, female, discharge weight, lactation consult feedback, pediatric follow-up scheduled at Virginia Mason. The sheet had a coffee ring on it like a person who was happy and exhausted had rested their drink on it while packing a diaper bag. I could hear 1,000 voices telling me to play this private, to avoid spectacle, to let professionals handle it. But the next public scene arrived on its own at our HOA's Saturday stairwell cleaning day because of course it did. Neighbors with buckets, a speaker playing a 90s playlist, the board president passing out rags like a benevolent aunt, and me with a folder under my arm because time had done all of the arranging without me. I asked to speak at the break and laid out the City Light welcome for the Fairview address, the AmEx ad of N. Harris, the dry cleaner's Arlo still, and a printed copy of the Swedish discharge note with identifying details redacted to respect a child, but not a lie. I stated calmly that I had filed a police report with SPD case number SPD-2025-41990 regarding forgery on the deed and a fraud complaint with AmEx and BQ, both with numbers if anyone wanted specifics, and that I had opened a separate checking to route my shop's deposits. People stood there holding sponges, their faces stunned into the same expression a hailstorm puts on cars. The treasurer put a hand on my forearm and said the board would send a violation notice regarding unauthorized transfer of interest and a formal demand to reverse. Someone's teenage daughter walked by with her earbuds in and the sense to look away. I hired a lawyer, a woman on Pine with an office that smelled like old paper and new coffee and the steady confidence of someone who knows where to put commas on motions. She wrote letters that made men in title offices sit back in their chairs and stare at walls. She sent a demand to Rainier Title to preserve the notary book page for the deed in question and to produce any ID copies taken during the appointment. She prepared a petition for legal separation with temporary orders that neither party incur debt in the other's name or transfer or encumber community property without written consent, that minor children we have none, but the phrasing lives in boilerplate like a superstition not be introduced to unrelated overnight guests in either residence, that neither party alter school or medical records of any minor under their care without joint signatures, and that all exchanges of property or personal effects be recorded in writing. She filed a motion to void the quitclaim based on forgery and lack of consideration, and attached my certification that I had not signed and had been asleep at the time the DocuSign recorded. The King County clerk stamped it with a number that now sits at the top of a piece of paper like a flag. I called SBD for the forgery report, sat in a small room with an officer whose face was neither cruel nor bored, and slid over the DocuSign audit trail, the recorder receipt, a copy of my driver's license, and the ring/wise timestamps. He assigned a case, handed me a card, and told me forgery cases eat time before they eat anything else. I walked home past Ballard Commons Park, where a man in a yellow slicker fed a dog part of his sandwich, and the dog looked like faith-made fur. Tom insisted the child was not his, and that I was reading compassion as guilt, and that the paper was out of context. He said the lease was temporary, administering to someone who needed help, that he had put his name on City Light as a favor, that the AmEx had been an error by a clerk who doesn't understand forms, that the notary stamp was a mistake from the office that would correct itself. He told me I was turning kindness criminal. He said I had always loved my documents more than my trust. I kept my voice inside my head because the court would not read audio. I printed the story he was telling and compared it to the pictures and found the edges did not match. I set boundaries the way I set tile, one line at a time, level by level. I froze the joint cards. I opened a BQ sub-account that only I could see and labeled it lighting ops in case of stray eyes. I sent a written notice to AmEx that any additional authorized users must require my notarized consent, and the letter's language felt archaic and perfect. I gave our building manager a copy of the temporary orders once the court signed them, and she nodded because she has seen more lives break in stairwells than anyone wants to admit. I told my father I would visit in 2 weeks, not this weekend. He said the dialysis chair would keep his spot warm. I wrote a note to myself that if anyone attempted to add themselves to any account, I would let the bank call me petty. The independent witness who toppled my last doubt was not a neighbor, but a coworker of Tom's. A paramedic from Station 9 stopped by my pop-up booth at the Ballard Farmers Market on Sunday and lingered a beat longer than a customer deciding between matte black and bone glaze. She said she had seen me at the Union picnic and regretted I hadn't tried the peach cobbler. Then she told me, with the careful cadence of someone who knows the cost of getting involved, that a female resident at Tom's station had been crashing often at a Fairview unit for months, that shift swaps occurred with unusual frequency around Thursdays, that a toddler had been in their bay one afternoon when Tom had stopped by on a day he wasn't scheduled and introduced the child as the little friend. She said she could be wrong and hoped she was. She gave me her first name and her phone number and told me I didn't need to use it, and walked away with an espresso and a bundle of basil. I stood there with a cash apron around my waist and the sense that my bones had shifted inside my skin. The moral fork came the day Swedish called. Not for me. A billing department rep phoned to verify insurance information for an infant listed under our plan. I asked them to repeat the date of birth. It matched the discharge sheet. The nurse apologized for the mix-up when I told her there must be a mistake. I hung up and stared at the ceramic glaze drying on a row of pendants and felt like a thief in my own store. I wrote a letter to our insurer disputing the addition of any non-dependent and requesting a fraud review, I copied the lawyer. I wrote the infant's name on a piece of paper and underlined it twice and then crossed it out because a child is not a case. Would you demand a DNA test in writing now, with the knowledge that a nurse's slip and an insurance ping could be resolved by a swab and a lab, or would you wait because a child did not choose the story and demand it only if a court or a checkbook forced your hand? Would you email the hospital's HR with dates and names and ask them to discipline 2 employees for violating policy, accepting that the only satisfaction you will get is an email that says we take these matters seriously? Or would you save the little pieces of validation for the days you need to believe you are not crazy? The court date for the quitclaim came faster than my body had time to build callus. The notary produced a journal page with a signature that did not match the way my hand makes loops when I slow, a photocopy of a driver's license that had my number right, but a photo that was not me, the last digit in the license number missing from the journal like someone's attention had tripped. The judge reviewed the DocuSign audit trail and the ring/wise timeline and the city light welcome and asked the title company to explain their procedures. She voided the quitclaim as to me and referred the rest to the prosecutor if SPD so chose, and her pen moved like a metronome. The relief was innate rather than a shout. After that, life narrowed in a way that felt cruel and clean. Tom moved into a 1-bedroom in South Lake Union because the lease existed whether I recognized it or not. Our calendars became a barter of days with a child who does not share our blood. I requested that any time he spent with that child be separate from any time he spent with me or my father because I could not be the person who pretended lines did not exist. I wrote to the insurer again with the case number they had assigned in -2025-1193. I called BQ twice a week until the fraud refund posted for the SLU furnishings transfer. I taped a label under our breaker panel that says in all caps "Do not touch," and below it, smaller, "Per court order," even though no order said that it was for me as much as for anyone else. Sometimes at night I take Howe Street down to the water and stand at the edge of Lake Union, the floats of a seaplane biting the surface gently, the city's light making a noise I feel more than hear. I do not look up at the Fairview building because I do not need to put windows to paper. I think of the toddler's hat with bare ears, and the way Tom's hands know how to carry anyone like a sacred thing. I think of cedar cologne and chain grease and the way our little kitchen smells when I pull scones out at 6 a.m. because sleep ran away and flour is cheaper than a courtroom. I think of a child's foot pressing against a palm the first time it learns that pressure makes a response. My father talks about the dialysis machine as if it were a boat that takes him to a place where the river runs cleaner. He says he will take me fishing when this all calms. It will not calm the way a lake does at dawn. It will quiet the way traffic does at 3:00 a.m., a hum you can ignore if you imagine it is your own blood. I see Tom sometimes at the co-op on 15th buying a rotisserie chicken, or crossing the Fremont Bridge in a medic unit, or standing by the Firefighter Memorial on 4th Ave during a ceremony. He looks like a person who makes impossible choices in one set of rooms and terrible ones in another. He waved once and I waved back. I mailed him a certified letter that says if he seeks to add any person to my insurance again, I will press the charge the prosecutor has left half open. I wrote that I would request a paternity test only if the court asked, and that I would speak the child's name kindly if I ever needed to, and not at all if I didn't. I wrote that the breaker is now locked. At 1:43 a.m., the Ring sometimes sends a software update because it has a sense of humor I do not share. I no longer fear the blue ribbon on DocuSign because I learned how easy it is to draw a shape that looks like consent. I keep my receipts in a box labeled cone even though the quarter is past because the label comforts me. When the city's recorder emails me a weekly digest of documents filed against my parcel, I read them in the half light and sometimes there is nothing at all. On those days I step into the hallway and touch the cheap little lock on the breaker panel, the one I bought of Fred Mayer next to the aisle with absurdly tiny screwdrivers and teen-friendly nail polish, and I listen to the building breathe. The birds start around 4 in summer, arguing like a committee of elders beneath my window. I watch the ring timeline sit clean, bars of gray and blue and no gaps at all, and the little blue ring glows. An unblinking eye that promises very little and yet, for now, holds